Well, it is an honor to have Karen Swallow Pryor with us on the podcast today. We made a separate intro for her because she has an illustrious biography that we have read to you already. And we are way below her pay grade, but she has been gracious to give of her time to have a conversation with Walker and I today. And the first thing I want to ask you, even before I ask you to introduce yourself, is on your Twitter handle, it's the Notorious KSP. Can we call you Notorious today? Would that be okay?
If you like, but Karen probably is better.
All right, very good, Karen. Well, do you mind giving us a little bio? Not so much your career accolades, but where'd you come from, and where have you been, and where are you now?
Well, I was born and raised in Maine, so and lived in New York. So I'm really a transplanted Yankee living in Virginia now, which really is God's country. It's beautiful. I love it. I've been teaching at Liberty University here in Central Virginia for 21 years. Actually, I'm wrapping up my 21st year and my time there because I'm moving on to Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in the fall to a post as research professor of English and Christianity and culture. So as that title suggests, I mean, I am primarily an English professor, but I also have been writing a lot on the church and culture and engaging in the culture. It's a passion of mine, and I'm informed by that, really, by my lifetime of reading and loving great literature. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
That's great. Thank you for that. And let me ask you, and this is my own interest because my dad was an evangelist and we traveled throughout New England in my growing up years. What town in Maine were you from?
Most people haven't heard of it. It's a tiny town called Monmouth, and it's not far. It's outside the capital city of Augusta.
Okay, yeah, we went to Augusta a lot, so very good.
Okay,
And
yeah.
very, very beautiful part of the country, but I'm sure Virginia's winters are less epic.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, you had mentioned that what you're going to be doing in your new job and what you do a lot of now is engaging the culture. And we like to think that here at Prayerfully Woke, at least Jonathan and I don't know, maybe we missed the mark a little bit, but we like to think that we are not aloof to what is going on in the culture, and we like to engage spiritual things with cultural things. And one of the things that stuck out to us about you was your social media presence and how you identify as a conservative, but the way that you also maybe challenge some of those thought processes from within. And so honestly, today, one of the things we want to talk about is this tweet that you tweeted out. Jonathan has here. I'll read it. But you said this. You said they said they believed in the sanctity of human life. I believed them. They said they believed that character matters. I believed them. They said they believed in biblical principles. I believed them. I still believe in the sanctity of human life, in character, and in biblical principles, even if I don't always believe them. So maybe this has opened up a can of worms. I don't know. We enjoy talking about this kind of stuff. What do you mean by that tweet? And I know we already mentioned you've been at Liberty University, which is one of the most conservative Christian colleges, and I mean, you could say the most conservative Christian college in America. So how, I guess you could say, from within the belly of the beast, are you? I don't know if that's the correct terminology, but how do these kinds of thought processes come along? What do you mean by that tweet?
Yeah. So yeah, I would have to share a little bit more of my story, I guess, to make sense of that. Obviously, that tweet speaks to a particular time and moment, in the past, week or so, or whenever I tweeted it. But it really goes back. I mean, I was raised in a Christian home, accepted Jesus as a little girl, but grew up largely outside of what we would call today evangelical subculture. And I think that's a great blessing. But as I became an adult, in my most formative years as a young adult and in graduate school and newly married, I was really formed by the culture wars model of cultural engagement that, defined the 80s and the 90s. And I really came of age as a Christian and even politically with the election of Bill Clinton. And as a very conservative, biblically based Christian, opposed to abortion and sexual immorality and all those things in those years, as I remain to be opposed to them, I kept hearing my leaders, the church leaders who were forming me and leading me and teaching me and training me, talking about character and how character matters. And of course, as conservative Christians, we opposed a lot of what Bill Clinton stood for in terms of his policies, but it was even more his his moral character that everyone was talking about. I was horrified by his moral character before the election because credible accusations of sexual abuse and rape came out even before he was elected. And then once he was elected, not once, but twice, we learned more about his infidelity and his failure to adhere to the truth. I'm old enough to remember all these things very well. And so by the time we got to 2016 and we were looking at a presidential candidate in Donald Trump, who reflected a lot of the same qualities, I quite frankly felt abandoned by my conservative Christian community. Obviously not all of them, but really the people of my generation and older, who I think compromised a great deal in supporting him. And we're seeing more and more support come out for him even in this election, which is just, again, I couldn't believe it when Bill Clinton, when Bill Clinton was elected the first time, I just thought, well, we'll learn our lesson the hard way. And then he was elected again. And so it's kind of like deja vu all over again. And, I do identify as a conservative, even though some people might say that I'm not, because we don't even know what true conservatism is. It's not just blind allegiance to the Republican Party. I wouldn't even say the Republican Party or many Republican candidates are really conservative. I would, without going into all the detail, I was honored to be included in a list of contemporary conservatives put out recently by Intercollegiate Studies International, ISI, and they gave some really good definitions of what it means to be conservative in a way that transcends political party and can look different. There are various kinds of people that can be conservative in a variety of ways. And for me, it just means, first of all, believing in absolute truth, goodness, and beauty, and believing that those are important enough to conserve in our policies and practices, both politically and in the church and in our lives.
That's so well said. I want to tell you why that tweet resonated with me so much. And if you have something to add, then you can. But I just want to get this out there because I told you before we started recording, when I read that tweet, I said, we got to have this lady on if we can, because, in the way I grew up, we were pro-life unless it was a guy on death row, right? And or a guy or a person that was trying to come across the border. And so you going down this list that you believed all these things, but we don't always believe them. And I think your definition of being conservative is well put, and it doesn't mean just towing a certain party line, but there's truly life lessons and there's truly character that does matter and does count. And so I appreciate you standing up and speaking out, because I know it's not easy, because you're kind of a big deal. And so
my dogs think so.
Well, there you go. So. That's all that matters sometimes. But I appreciate you standing up for what you believe in.
Yeah, I feel like you go.
Well, I just want to say, because I didn't bring up those particular issues, but when I made that tweet and I used the term sanctity of human life, I am thinking of the immigrants as well. And I am thinking of those on death row. I mean, either we believe in the sanctity of human life or we don't. And there are so many ways that both major political parties and many people, including all of us here, are inconsistent. But we really need to strive to be consistent.
Yeah, I think what we confuse in the church sometimes, this is my humble opinion, but Jesus' kingdom is not of this world. And so there's no way, I don't think there's any way that as Christians we can align perfectly with any political party or with any political candidate, and to pretend that we can, and to pretend that someone is God's man because the economy's up. I don't know how I can't reconcile that.
And with that said, I'll just add, and some people would agree with that and say, well, and since no person can align perfectly or no party can align, we have to choose the lesser of two evils. But I would say, because this kingdom is not our world, this world is not our world, we cannot support someone whose evil goes just too far. We're all fallen, of course, and there is no perfection, but we cannot support evil in order to do good.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, that's a good line. Yeah,
Thank
I like that. I like that a lot. So I gotta ask, is part of your exiting from Liberty, is that related to the leadership there, or it's just a question?
Yeah, it is not in the way that you probably mean it and might seem obvious to a lot of people, or that they might think. I mean, I've been at Liberty for 21 years, so I have a lot invested there, and they have a lot invested in me. And what's been happening, the polarized political discourse and conversation that's been going on over the past few years is troubling and distressing. But when you have a lot of time invested in a place, you don't give up on that easily. And so it has been disheartening. Yet I still believe in that institution. There are many wonderful people there, many wonderful colleagues. The students are amazing. There's such great ministry going on. In fact, it's such a large university that what the president says and does really doesn't have very much impact on what happens on the ground in the classroom. I would have been happy to stay there for the rest of my life, even though, I do have these disagreements. But at the same time, I think the values, there was a divergence of values. And part of that is that, that I think that my particular voice and my writing and my speaking didn't get the kind of support that I need at this time in my life. I wasn't, looking for another position. But when one was offered to me that I couldn't refuse, that would give me that kind of support, that I think for the things that I believe God has called me to, then I felt like it would be disobedient to turn that down.
Very good. Very good. And it was, I've heard you talk to it a little bit. It was a great set of circumstances, that the way that God landed you where you were at Liberty, and I'm sure how he's opened the door for you in your next venture. And that's a cool testament of the faithfulness of God, I think,
Yes.
also.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been very faithful, and that's why I trust him more than I trust myself, which is saying a lot, because I like to think pretty highly sometimes of how I think and what I would do. So, but God knows better than I do.
Absolutely. Well, you're a big advocate of reading, and reading well. Talk to us, and this is a broad question, but talk to us about the importance of literature, and what you feel maybe the genre of literature has affected your life the most.
I really think that reading literature for my whole life and teaching it and introducing others to it has formed the way I actually engage in culture and the way I think about politics, the things that we've been talking about here. Because what literature does for us is it takes us into the way that other people think and act and believe, so that we can see the world through their eyes without necessarily accepting their worldview or agreeing with their actions. It's really a practice in in not only loving our neighbors, but even just understanding and getting to know our neighbors, even if they're fictional ones, because what makes great literature great is the fact that it reflects something of the human condition and of real life. And so I think that literature basically models for us, it embodies a way of thinking, a kind of circumspection that is increasingly rare because digital media doesn't encourage that, and digital media is forming us in ways that are exactly the opposite of circumspection. It's pushing us toward polarization. So I've always loved reading. It's been a great gift. It always is. But in this particular time, I think we need the gifts of great literature even more than ever.
Very good. What's your favorite genre to read, or what do you feel like has shaped you the most? Because I know I've heard you talk about fiction. I've heard you talk about very deep theological works. And so what do you think is the most shaping for you?
Well, my area of academic specialty, which is also the area that I love the most, is British novels of the 18th and 19th century, or even just all fiction. But when I say fiction, I really mean like literary fiction. I think sometimes, especially Christians, think of fiction as being what, Christian read and write and publish Christian. I don't read that. When I'm talking about fiction, I'm talking about literary fiction that uses words not just to communicate ideas the way a sermon or a tract would communicate ideas, but uses words in an artful way, in the same way that a painter uses paint to recreate something of human experience. So a painter paints a bowl of fruit, and we go to a museum to look at it, not because we want to know what a bowl of fruit looks like, but because, at least I hope not. I hope we've seen fruit, but we go to see how a human being can create something through this medium, through the gift of creativity that God gives us by virtue of being made in his image as a small c creators. And so literary fiction does the same thing using words. It recreates worlds using language, which isn't, it's great like paint and sculpture and marble, except it's even better because words get at the heart of who God is and who we are in being made in his image, because word is another name for God. And so there's something really special and powerful about language.
Man, I love that so much. I'm just, as you're, when God did not paint the world into existence. God spoke it into existence. God didn't make a movie of the world into. He spoke it. He spoke. Language is powerful, and I think that's just as you're saying that, I'm thinking, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. The logos, the mind, the logic, what God is speaking. I love that. So, Karen, I want to ask you. So then let's move the conversation away, if we can, from just normal literature to biblical literature. How do you when you sit down and just in your normal devotional time as a Christian to read the Bible, how do you navigate the different genres that are within the Bible? Because as we know, the Bible is better understood as a library of books rather than one big old book. How do you navigate the different genres in there?
Well, I think the fact that the books are all representative of various genres makes all the difference in how we read the Bible. Actually, I just finished up teaching a course for the first time this semester called The Literature of the Bible, and that is exactly what we did. We went through every book of the Bible and looked at its primary genre and the various other genres that we might find in those books. And the reason that it makes such a difference is, again, it's language, and as 21st century American evangelicals, that's what I am, and that's probably your identity as well. We are so accustomed to focusing on the content of something. When we talk about movies, we talk about, we have websites devoted to saying how many swear words are in it, and how many sex acts or this or that are in it. That's all about content. When we want to know what the message of the movie is or what the message of the book is, and we pay very little attention to form.
Mm.
But there's a famous saying popularized by a 20th century communications theorist named Marshall McLuhan, and he said, "The medium is the message," or in other words, the form is the content. The way the Bible puts it is speaking the truth in love. So truth is the content, the form is love. It is what Jesus didn't just tell us the gospel. He is the gospel. He,
Amen.
he took on our sins and died for us he did it. It wasn't just a message. He took the form on the cross. So I could go on and on, but
Please do.
this is a, this is the heart of what it means to communicate in any way. I mean, how many times have we had a conversation with a loved one where, where we were chastised with the truth that it wasn't what we said, it was how we said it, right? It wasn't what you said, it was how you said it. That how we say something matters so much that it actually changes the message. And so it's true in the books of the Bible. I mean, a lot of times in conservative circles will say, use the term like, I take the Bible literally. And I know what people mean by that, and that's fine. But, we really don't take the Bible literally, because we actually understand that the Bible uses poetry, and it uses metaphor, and it uses simile. The books that are historical, like the first 5 books of the Bible, they are history, but within them, there are other genres, and many of them. And so it's important to understand when we're reading a poem versus reading a book of history, or a chronology or a biography or a prophecy. All of those things affect the way we read the Bible, in the same way that, if I'm on Twitter and I put out a tweet that's meant ironically or sarcastically, and it's not taken that way, which is hard, to do that on Twitter, and the opposite is understood, then my message, I've just communicated the opposite message that I intended, because the form wasn't communicated. So
Right.
it's form is everything.
That happens with me and my wife on a daily basis, Karen. So thank you for bringing
I
that up.
wasn't eavesdropping. I just, I promise.
So, so Karen, then let's go just even a little bit deeper. Talk to me about the parables of Christ, because when Jesus walked this earth and he taught his disciples, he he could have just told them. He could have just had a nice college style lecture like you give, but instead he showed them through story. Can you speak to the power of the parables and just how story speaks to humans, and just the brilliance of Christ in that?
Um, it is brilliant to him. I mean, of him, because I mean, think of how we all respond to stories. I mean, it wasn't even just Christ. Think back to Nathan going before David and confronting him with this horrible truth that no one wants to hear, which is, you are the man, you did this horrible thing.
Yeah.
But he didn't tell it to him in a straightforward way. He told a story that drew David in about the lamb of a poor man being stolen. And of course David understood the truth of that story, and then he was prepared to see it in his own life. So that's in the Bible. But it's also just the way we all operate as human beings, again, because we're made in God's image and his name is the word, but we already covered that ground. But the parables, again, there's so much to think about why Jesus used the parables. When I teach introductory courses in literature to freshmen and sophomores, and a common complaint when we read a poem is like, well, why don't they just come out and say what they want to say? Well, why doesn't anyone just come out? I mean, have you ever been on a date for the first time? Nobody comes out and just says what they're thinking. We're all kind of trying to figure it out. And so that's just a trivial example, but when, I mean, Jesus, his truth is for everyone, but we don't all want to hear it. And it's almost, like Jesus is inviting us. He's not forcing us. So when he tells a story and he says, let he who has ears hear, that's an invitation for us to listen to him or try to learn from him as we will. And we know not everyone will. And so that's just sort of the idea behind parables. But of course, even the example he sets by using parables that are so steeped in the time and age and of the culture that he was living in, so that the people could relate to these images of seeds, and oil and things that were part of their everyday lives. It exemplifies for us how Jesus is for our everyday lives, should be part of our everyday lives, and we can see the truth of the gospel in every area of life, in every square inch, as Kuyper would say. So I'm just scratching the surface here. So go ahead and
No,
prompt me or say something
you,
else.
you're doing great. You're absolutely killing it right now. Um, I just want to point out a specific parable, not necessarily to talk about that parable, but the way Christ ends it. And I want to know, how does this engage our brain in helpful ways? So Jesus tells this story about the Good Samaritan. And I don't want to get into the whole thing, but Jesus ends the story by saying, who was the one that showed mercy, or who was the good neighbor? And he's forcing the hearers to think.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that important for us to not just read superficially a story, or to just be told a truth? Why is it important to engage our brains in that way?
Well, I think all of us, have, even just as growing up, there are things that we've learned. We've had to learn the hard way. And when people say that, they mean, we weren't listening to what our parents told us. We had to find out the hard way, not to touch the stove, or, go too fast on the bike, or worse things. I mean, that is just part of what it means to be human. There's another, I think, kind of wisdom we find in Jesus using the parables, and it's something articulated so beautifully by the 19th century American poet Emily Dickinson, in a poem where she said, it begins, it says, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant." And now I can't remember the rest of it, but it's basically talking about how the truth is like a light in her poem, and if we look directly at it, it will blind us. And it's the same way, like in the Old Testament, when Moses wanted to see God, and God was like, you can't handle the truth, right? And he lets him just see, the back of God, his, like, as he's walking by, because we really can't handle the whole truth. Well, the same is true. I mean, Jesus is God, and so first of all, we can't handle the truth. We can't handle looking directly into the sun. But also, the little bit of truth that we can manage to understand and apply to our lives is just more meaningful. I mean, we have to see it for ourselves. There's a time and place to kind of give us the truth, give it directly, and we do that as well. But there's also a time and place to model and to show and to allow us to grapple and learn on our own. Because that's part, I mean, let's face it, why are we here on this earth? If there are some of us who are going to spend eternity with God in heaven, in the new heaven and the new earth, then why are we even here? Obviously, there's a reason for us being on this earth, to be saved, to be sanctified, to grow, and prepare ourselves for that eternity. There's some sort of preparation that God wants. Otherwise, he could have skipped this whole part, right? And so the question for us is, what does he have for us to do and learn while we're here in this, temporary home?
Very good.
I love that. And just as we're talking about like these parables and these metaphors, I think it's very interesting how you had mentioned like oil and seed, and how, Christ, I almost wonder sometimes if Jesus was just walking along and saw something and thought, what, that would be a great way to convey, because he'll say things in the Gospels like, to what should I compare the kingdom of God? He's asking himself this, rhetorical question, to what should I compare it? Oh, look, it's like a mustard seed, And so I think that context was so important to Jesus. And I think that to us, like, this speaks, beyond literature, but historically too. Like, you got to understand the historical context of what he was, how he would have, those metaphors would have been taken, and all of those things. I don't know if it's really a question there, but but yeah, I mean, what do you think about that? I think that, yeah.
No, I mean, I think context is really everything. Well, there's a balance, right? Even if we think of text versus context, it's like the balance between form and content. And so that's why, again, why I think so much of the polarization and the destructiveness that we see on social media is in large part because so much is decontextualized, including human beings. We decontextualize human beings all the time and what they say and what they do. And Jesus didn't do that. And he models that, in every way. So yeah, I think that's really insightful.
I love it.
Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. How do we, and just talking more about biblical text, how can we better wrestle with what is actually being said? Because you said the context is important. It's important if it's a poem. It's important if it's a piece of history. It's important if it's a parable, all these different things. So just being a superficial reader will get you so far, but only so far. Is there practices that you've done in reading scripture or reading other literature that have helped you to apply it, make it applicable to your own life, and see the deeper truths in it?
Well, again, I do think that just improving our skills and facility in the medium of language is helpful. So just growing an awareness of words and language and how they work, even in the most mundane ways. So again, like if we're in our interpersonal relationships, when we're having that discussion about, if you have an argument with your spouse about not what was said, but how it was said, how many hours do we spend, fleshing that out and trying to understand one another and realizing the many, many ways that we can miscommunicate unintentionally with one another and misunderstand one another. I mean, that is just the power and the gift and the vulnerability of language. And so if the Bible is also written in language, and if God is a God of the word and of words, then how much more thoughtful and intentional should we be about this gift of words and language and stewarding it well? And so just reading reflectively, reading slowly, that's probably the number one piece of advice that I have been giving in the past few years, because digital media and newspapers and blogs and tweets and Facebook posts and TikTok have all, they're cultivating habits in us of speed reading, skimming, and that's the exact opposite of what we need to do with the Bible, and also the exact opposite of what we need to do with poetry and literary fiction and theology and philosophy. Those things ask us, they actually require us to read slowly, immersively, and reflectively, and so much in our culture prevents us from doing that. This is why, partly why we see so many people sharing fake news, or sharing a work of satire which says on the website that it's satire, and then it gets shared and commented on because they think it's actually straightforward. It's because we don't read slowly, reflectively, or in context. Like, that satire is a context. Like if you're sharing something from a website, look at what the website is and look if it says it's not that hard. Yet the fact that so many people are making these kinds of errors is because we're just fast, we're clicking, we're reading headlines. We aren't being Bereans, not only with the Bible itself, but even with the Facebook posts that we're circulating. We're very careless and very ignorant in a way that
just say it.
It is very reminiscent of the so-called, which is debatable, but so-called dark ages. We are putting ourselves into a new dark ages because we are acting ignorantly.
Wow.
Okay, so this is good.
So tweet that.
Yeah, tweet that. That'll be in the promo of the podcast. So you advocate for being shown more than just being told. And so maybe superficially, the outcome is that someone in ignorance reposts the Babylon Bee because they thought it was real news. But how bad is this for our soul? Past just the reactionary post on social media, how bad is it for our soul that we never really slow down and seek deeper truths for ourselves? And I'm sure for the last several years you've been teaching millennials, and this, I'm barely a millennial. Walker, he might be too young to be a millennial, to be perfectly honest. But is this a millennial problem that you see? I know that's a broad statement, but it seems to me like it's a generational problem, that we're always in a rush, we're always stressed out, we're always in a hurry. And so how bad is that for our soul not to slow down and seek deeper truths?
Well, I see it across generations. I definitely want to say that. And it's the generation I'm teaching now, which is called Generation Z, is actually, I'm starting to see them express the sense they understand that they don't know how to read. This semester I had students tell me, we have not been taught how to read. Now they don't mean sound out the letters, they mean to read, although maybe some of them but no, they mean they don't know how to read reflectively and with comprehension. It's worse than just not seeking deeper truths. It's actually that we are falling for lies. We can no longer distinguish the truth from falsehood anymore. And then with that, we see, I think all of us encounter comments where it doesn't even really matter because if it were true or it sounds true, we do. This is what a few years ago, one of the dictionaries voted post-truth as the word of the year. We live in a post-truth culture, and Christians and the church are not immune from this. So we are sacrificing truth and exchanging it for lies through our willing behavior, even if we don't realize that's what the consequences are. So this is not only bad for our souls, it's bad for other people's souls as we lead them astray.
So, that's not to overstate it, but certainly not to understate it. That's the importance of slowing down. Yeah. And allowing the truth of Scripture to change us, allowing the truth that we find in other literary works to shape us to be proper humans. Mm-hmm. There's big things at stake then, you would say.
There are huge things at stake. I mean, there are, the gift of literacy, widespread literacy, is about 500 years old, right? It's a gift of the Protestant Reformation, essentially. Yeah. And we've had a pretty good run. But we could lose it. So, yeah. My point is, there was not always the ability of people to read the Bible or anything else. And we've had that gift. The church brought us that gift, and we've had it for 500 years. And we could lose it.
Not to go crazy, and I always steal Walker's time towards the end of the podcast. I always do this every time. But not to go too crazy, but would you put that on the church? You said it was the church's gift. Is it the church's gift to save then? Do you think the church plays a role?
Absolutely. I mean, who is it that believes in truth with a capital T? Who is it that believes in the word with a capital W? We can't blame the culture for this. We are the ones who should be preserving it and keeping it.
That's golden. Who's that?
These are my dogs.
What's your dog's name?
This is Ruby.
I love it.
And Eva.
They're
bird dogs.
They're a lot more friendly than a couple episodes back. We had a gentleman that had his dogs like barking mad during the episode. So your dogs are a little bit more friendly. But Dr. Pryor, I want to ask you, so in my younger years, I was really formed not by Christian reading or anything, actually from the Harry Potter series and from a lot of really interesting young fiction like that. and obviously since then have grown in biblical knowledge and reading and Christian theology. But then this past year, I took a little hiatus from Christian reading just to read normal stuff, just to read normal books. And my favorite book from that time was 1984 by George Orwell. And so you kind of get two different perspectives there, right? Harry Potter is this world that is enchanted by magic, and it kind of speaks to like goodness and kindness, and there's all sorts of magical things happening, and then the 1984 is the exact opposite, where it's just totalitarian state where nobody has any freedom whatsoever. And as I'm reading Harry Potter, that speaks to me in how the whole world is enchanted with God's goodness, whether or not, obviously it's not the same exact thing, but we look around and we can see a good world. 1984, I also look and I see how this world could be if, man's sinfulness is taken to the absolute extremes. And so then I take that with me back into reading in the scripture, and I can see on one hand the goodness that God is offering us, and then on the other hand I can see the sin and the bad things that humans bring upon this world. So my question to you after saying all of that is how does your academic reading or personal reading inform your Christian reading of the Bible, of your theology?
That's a good question. So, wow. I just love that you read 1984 is one of my favorite books. It's very dark and hard, but so it has so much important truth in it. It's very powerful. So I think, again, some of the things I've said before, like just reading literary works, reading works that show how a well-crafted turn of phrase can just illuminate something. It can make me see something differently because it can make a connection that I hadn't seen before. That's what language does. It's all language is metaphorical, right? It's all like a symbol for something, and then the words make connections for us. And so just being able to just becoming more conversant in the way language works helps me to go back to the Bible and really dig deeper in the way the language in the Bible works, knowing that not only is it beautifully crafted language, but it's inspired by God. And so there's a reason for the way something is expressed. And there's a reason for the form that it takes. There's a reason why the book of Ecclesiastes, my favorite book, is included in the Bible. And there's basically there's a reason, and we can trust that even if we don't understand every idea or every why certain things are there, that God has a reason for them being there, in the same way that a good author has made his choices of words and images for a reason. And so again, especially in teaching literature, I teach students to really look at the text and say, why is this here? What is the effect of this image or this metaphor compared, why is it here? Well, those are the same questions we should ask of the Bible, especially of the parts that we don't like, or that we wish weren't there, or the ones that don't get brought up all the time in Sunday services because they just don't fit in with a certain narrative. It's all there. And it's just eternally revelatory every time we go back to it, and we can never exhaust its riches.
I love that. Love that a lot. I have one last question for you, Dr. Pryor. And it's this, Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." I tend to, just in my life and the people I know, the people who are more well-read, especially of the Bible, tend to be more empathetic, more kind. Now, that I'm speaking in generalities here, but generally speaking, that is how it is. Do you see a connection of the two things, where the more that we read, the more that we expose ourselves to truth with a capital T, but also truth with a lowercase t, do you see a connection between that and growth in the personality and growth and how we relate to one another?
That's a really good question, and I want to be careful here, because I do believe that reading literature can help us be more empathetic. And research actually shows that that may be the case in cognitive science. Yet at the same time, empathy itself is important and good, but it's not good by itself. So, for example, like we could take the word loyalty. Loyalty is a classical virtue, especially popular in the Roman culture, ancient Rome. But loyalty is not a virtue if it is attached to some evil, right? If you are loyal to an evil man, then that loyalty is not good. And so I would say empathy is similar. Empathy is a good, I talk about this a little bit more in my book on reading well. I have a section where I talk about the difference between empathy and compassion, and it is they're similar, but not exactly the same. Because, and that's why, most translations of the Bible will talk about Jesus having compassion with those that he encounters who are suffering. And compassion means literally suffering with. And so it's more than just understanding. It's actually being with and kind of, well, ultimately Jesus does take the place. We can't do that, or maybe we can to a certain extent. And so what the power that I see literature having is a power, among other things, to increase our empathy. But even that, we have to do something with that, and it has to be something good, because psychopaths who don't really feel empathy, or sociopaths, but they can fake it, right, in order to victimize people. Narcissists do the same thing. I think we have a lot of abuse in the church because of narcissists who can fake empathy. And I think maybe they even have a sense of empathy, but it's not attached to goodness. So reading literature and gaining all the skills that it can give us have to be connected to something larger and good and eternal. And of course, that is, the capital W word. And so it's a tool, and it has to be used correctly in order to be good.
That's so good.
Amen. I love all that.
Karen, this has been such a blessing to us. You're so awesome. The notorious KSP, ladies and gentlemen. Can you tell people what books they should buy from you and where they can find you on the World Wide Web?
Sure. The easiest place to find me on the World Wide Web is on Twitter. I spend too much time there. Speaking of, formation and bad habits, it's KSPRIOR, KS Pryor. I have a website too, which is, you can always find me there, KarenSwallowPryor.com. Actually, I need to update it. All of my books aren't there. I don't know if you're showing this, but I have a new edition of Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad that just came out with an introduction I've written. Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility with an introduction and discussion questions I've written. I don't even have them. It's just coincidence I have and on Reading Well, which I think is probably my most characteristic work, where I actually talk about a lot of the things we've been talking about here, like not only how to read well, but why it's important and how we can benefit from it.
Awesome. The best place to buy those is on your website?
Oh, well, I don't know. You can go to the website for information, but either Lifeway Books or Amazon or your local independent bookseller. They all will have them.
I don't know that we'll put the Lifeway in the link, but maybe the Amazon one. I'm just kidding. We love Lifeway.
Actually, Lifeway has a really amazing deal on my books right now. So well, that's where you should go.
Very good. Thank you for that. I'm going to pause right here, and we'll cut this out of the recording. Our podcast, as you probably know by now, is Prayerfully Woke. And we always end an episode by asking our guest, what does prayerfully woke mean to you? Woke is, of course, kind of a social justice slang type thing. So I'm gonna
we hijacked it and we put a spin on it of
we did our best to
prayerfully. So
that's right. But at any rate, I'll ask you that question. We'll sign off, and then we'll greet you goodbye. Okay. Thank you for your time. Well, Karen, it's been such a blessing to have you on. We got to ask you one last question that we ask to all of our guests. Dr. Karen, what does prayerfully woke mean to you?
Well, of course, to me, woke means awareness, right? Being aware of something, having our eyes, being once blind, but now able to see the things around us that we should have probably seen a long time ago, especially I speak of myself. And so I think seeing what's before, seeing the truth, seeing injustice is the first step, and it's a big one. But then we have to be prayerful about what we do about it and how we go about it. And so to me, I love the title of your podcast, because it's not just about being woke. It's also about you know, doing what we should do about it, what we see in the Lord, and with seriousness, diligence, and prayerfulness.
Awesome.
Amen. I
Thank
love
you
it.
so much. Well, we so much appreciate your time. It's been such a blessing to us, and we thank you for it. We thank you for your insight and your wisdom. Folks, check out Karen's books, check out her website. And as always, thank you for tuning in to Prayer for the Woke. Peace.
See ya.